This is Mrs. Appia with the Grade 7 Module 2 practice test for Topic A. Jessie and Maya are playing a card game. The card in Jessie's hands are shown below. What is the total score of Jessie's hand? So we know that we want to add those numbers together. We're going to add 2 plus 9 plus negative 8 plus negative 5. I like to put my positive numbers first, followed by my negative numbers. Then I'm going to add my positive numbers. Then I'm going to add my negative numbers. Finally, I add those two numbers, and my answer is negative 2. So the total score for Jessie's hand is negative 2. Support your answer by showing your work on a horizontal number line and using arrows to represent each value. Remember to start from 0. And you can do this in any order you choose. I'm going to do it in the order that the cards are presented. So for the positive 2, I'm going to go to the right 2 spaces. For the negative 8, I'm going to go to the left 8 spaces. 2, 4, 6, 8. Positive 9, I'm going to go to the right. So that's 6, 7, 8, 9 to the right. And then negative 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, going to the left because it is a negative number. Finally, circle the answer that you end up in. Next, if Jessie picks up another card, what card would make his total score equal to 0? Model this addition problem, the old score plus the new card, on a vertical number line and circle the answer. So the old score is negative 2. In order to get a score of 0, he would need a positive 2, the opposite card. So we have negative 2 plus 2 equals 0. Again, you need the opposite of what the score is. Then, modeling that on the number line, remember for addition to start at 0. We have a negative 2, so we're going down to the negative numbers, and then positive 2 we go up to, and then circle the answer where you end up. Next, this is page 2. Write an expression to find the total score of Maya's hand and show your work using an arithmetic method. So I have 2 plus negative 3 plus 7 plus negative 8. Using the commutative property, I'm going to regroup the numbers with my positives at the front and the negatives at the back. I'm going to add my positive numbers, then I'm going to add my negative numbers, and then I'm going to find the final score. These are different sign, so we subtract, and we have more negatives, so the answer is negative. So the score is negative 2. Next, use the rule of subtraction to rewrite the following as a single rational number. Remember that the rule of subtraction is to add the opposite of the second number and leave the first number alone. So I'm going to rewrite this subtraction to be 7 adding, and then the opposite of negative 4 is positive 4. And then just bring down the plus 6. Remember that minus a negative becomes plus a positive. And then just find your final answer. This gives me 10, and 7 plus 10 is 17. On page 3, model this expression on the number line below. Write the answer on the number line and circle it. Remember to start at 0. And then these marks, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. So this is negative 1/4, negative 2/4, or negative half, negative 3/4. And then this is 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4. So our first number is negative 1/4. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to go to the left because it's negative 1/4. Then I'm going to go to the right because it's positive 1 3/4. Well, 1 3/4 is equal to how many fourths? Just this part. So 4 times 1 plus 3 more is 7. So I'm going to be going 7/4 altogether. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is my 7/4, and that is 1 3/4. And then the answer, this would be 1 1/4, 1 1/2. So circle your answer, 1 1/2. Next, what value of A will make the equation a true statement? Explain how you arrived at your solution using complete sentences. What I want you to notice is that this problem is identical to the above problem, and you already know the answer to that. This answer is 1 1/2. So what number added to 1 1/2 will equal 0? You know that a number added to its opposite will give you a sum of 0. So the opposite of 1 1/2 is negative 1 1/2. So this would be 1 1/2 plus its opposite have a sum of 0. So the answer, A, equals negative 1 1/2. Negative 1 1/2. And then I'm going to go back here and notice that I didn't write the negative with it before. So I'm going to go back and fix that. The value of A is negative 1 1/2. So what value of A? The value is negative 1 1/2. And then it says, explain how you arrived at your solution. So first, I added negative 1/4 plus 1 3/4. And that answer is 1 1/2. Then the opposite of 1 1/2 added to 1 1/2 will equal 0. The opposite of 1 1/2 is negative 1 1/2. A number and its opposite have a sum of 0. Use the properties of operations and the rule of subtraction to rewrite the following as a single rational number. Show all of your steps. When they want a single rational number, that just means find the answer. The first thing that I want to do is I want to rewrite this subtraction using the rule of subtraction. And that is, subtraction means add the opposite. So I'm going to bring down the 6. I'm going to change this to adding the opposite. Plus, the opposite of negative 0.4 is positive 0.4. Then I just bring down the rest of the problem. Now, this is an addition problem. All numbers are positive, so I can add it in any order. I have decimals and fractions. So at this point, you need to decide which you prefer working with. You want to make sure that you know these fractions and their equivalent decimals. Memorize them. 1/4 is 0.25. 1/2 is 0.5. 3/4 is 0.75. Make sure that you've memorized at least those. Also, it's good to know the tenths. 0.1, 1/10. 0.2, 2/10. 3/10 would be 0.3. So make sure you know at least those equivalents. The reason this is a good problem to change to decimals instead of fractions is because when you add fractions, you need common denominators, and that will be an additional step. So for that reason, I'm going to convert this to a decimal. 17 3/4 is 17.75. Then I'm going to bring down the rest of the problem. Then I'm going to add the first two digits. So 6 plus 0.4 is 6.4. Then I'm going to add the 17.75. When you're adding these, make sure that you line up your decimals. So you're adding the same place value. 17 plus 6.4. I'm going to add a 0 there to keep my place values lined up. And for a final answer, we have 24.15. And our answer is positive because all of our rational numbers in this case were positive. If you prefer fractions, your answer would have looked like this. 6 plus 4/10 plus 17 and 3/4. 6 and 4/10 is 6 and 4/10 plus 17 and 3/4. The common denominator for 10 and 4 is 20. Rewrite your fractions. Times 2 times 2 is 8. Times 5 times 5 is 15. So we have 6 and 8/20 plus 17 and 15/20. 6 plus 17 is 23. 8 plus 15 is 23/20. 23/20 is 1 and 3/20. Add that to the 23 you already have. That gives you 24 and 3/20, which is equivalent. If you multiplied by 5s, you would get 15/100, which is what the decimal is. So again, you can choose fractions or decimals. We're going to do page 6 next. Fido is completing a math problem and represents this expression with a single rational number as shown in the steps below. Using arrows, show each of Fido's steps and then justify each step. Finally, show another way to solve the problem. Taking a look, we see what did Fido do in his first step? I'm noticing that the 4 moved to the end of the problem and the -9 and 3/5 moved up. So Fido switched places with the numbers. Fido regrouped. What makes that okay is the commutative property. You can change the order of an addition problem without changing the answer. Next, I noticed that Fido split up the -2 and 2/5 into -2 and -2/5. Also, Fido split up the other mixed number. So what did Fido do? He separated a mixed number. And then I also wanted you to notice what happened. Look, notice that this was a negative number there. And when he separated it, this whole thing is negative. So it's -2 and it's -2/5. And this negative is -9 and -3/5. So when you separate a negative mixed number, make sure you keep both parts negative. All right, taking a look at the next step. The first part stayed the same, and then I'm noticing that Fido moved the -9 and the -3/5. When you regroup and just reorder them, this is called the commutative property. The next step. So now we have a -1, and that's a new number. And I see that these two fractions were added together. So that is, find the sum of, and then the two numbers used were -2/5 and -3/5. So we found the sum of those two numbers. And then everything else stayed the same. In the next step, I noticed that the -2 and the -1 are added together to get -3. So I indicate that those two numbers came together to get the -3. And that is, find the sum of -2 plus -1. In the next step, Fido has added -3 plus -9. Find the sum of -3 plus -9. And the final step. Those are added together. Find the sum of -12 and 4. So I have shown what Fido did with arrows, and I wrote down the mathematical reason. Next, show another way to solve the problem. So I would solve this differently than Fido. I would combine my negatives together. So we have negative 2 and 2/5 plus negative 9 and 3/5. Then I would add the 4. These already have a common denominator, so you can just add the whole numbers and the fractions. Negative 2 plus negative 9 is negative 11. Then I'm going to add my fraction parts. 2/5 plus 3/5 is 5/5. And remember, that's negative as well. And that gives me negative 12. Then I would add the 4. These are different signs, so you subtract, and the answer would be negative. Double check to make sure that you got the same answer as Fido, because if you got a different answer, you may have made a mistake somewhere. That concludes the review. Please make sure that you have practiced writing out these steps. And in the previous problem, when there is an explanation, make sure that you practice writing that out so that your test is graded with the explanation, because you need that to get full credit. And then also, make sure that you show your work step by step. And on the first page, you want to make sure that you're using arrows at the end of your number lines to indicate which way you were going on that number line. All right, prepare well so that you will get a 4 on that test.